Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and Mega Man Legends, Rockman Dash in Japan, is an odd little series. Most entries in the franchise are platformers, but they added in deck-building RPGs with Battle Network, which continued in Star Force. Legends, though, kinda stands on its own. Sure, I guess you could call it a platformer, but with its 3D dungeon crawling, customizable loadout, and upgradable weapons, it's more somewhere between an adventure game like Zelda and an RPG, one completely different from EXE. Heck, a friend of mine even compared it to a Metroidvania, with how stuff like the jump upgrade and drill weapon open up new paths. And perhaps because of this uniqueness, while most people who like one of the other series will typically also enjoy another, I could see this one as having the most dedicated fans. So while this might not be the weirdest review out there, it might be a little strange for this channel, given how often its own niche it is. Legends is the last series in the main Mega Man timeline, sometime after ZX, and it appears that the world has been flooded. Thomas! Anyway, the population is made up of carbons, beings that are some combination of human and machine, though the ratio seems to vary from person to person. Mega Man Volnut is a digger, someone who enters into underground labyrinths fraught with Reaverbots, this game's primary enemies, to dig up treasure. He was raised by Professor Barrel, a seasoned digger himself, and whose granddaughter, Roll Casket, serves as mechanic and as spotter, or guide, when exploring ruins. Also has a monkey named Data to save his game. After one such dig, their ship, the Flutter, overheats and crash lands on Kattelox Island. As they look for parts to repair the ship, the island comes under attack by the Bond family, pirates who want to illegally enter the island's ruins and look for a legendary treasure that is said will bring disaster. The majority of the game is fighting off the Bonds and trying to explore the ruins before they can. The writing is probably the best part of the series. The characters are charming, with a lot of silly dialogue, and while the plot isn't terribly complex, at least not for this first one, it's a lot of fun to see some of the interactions. There's even some stuff that seems like it'd be strange to find in a Mega Man game, like Volnut finding an adult magazine in a bookstore, but resisting the urge to look because he's afraid of getting caught. In addition to being a closet pervert though, he's also a total pushover. Sure, him being absolutely the only one who can fight off pirates is kinda how you'd expect things to go, but him needing to explore all the ruins that are just too dangerous for everyone else, and not even keeping the treasury finds but instead handing it over to the city, feels like they're really taking advantage of him. It kinda feels like Mega Man is the strongest person in the game, but without any backbone. But hey, this is also the first Mega Man game I remember containing any real romance too, so it's got that going for it. Before Twilight, we had Team Roll and Team Tron, of which there is only one correct answer, and if you get it wrong, I'm not mad, just disappointed. But yeah, you get some very fun dialogue and characters here, complete with voice acting, which we'll talk about later. You're Mega Man, so you jump and shoot, but in 3D. Okay, it's a little more complicated than that. Well, it is, but it isn't. You still have your Buster, but it's customizable. It has 4 stats: attack, range, rapid, and energy. I think the last one determines how many shots can be out at once, and the rest should be obvious. You can equip up to 2 Buster parts at once, later 3, so find the best parts and put together a build that works for you. You also get a lock-on, making it a bit easier to shoot, since you don't need to wrestle the camera to line up your shots, but you can't move while targeting something. Shoulder buttons turn Mega Man, which can be a little awkward, but you can change that and a few other things in the options. I eventually got used to the shoulder thing though. You also get special weapons. Take items you find to Roll and she can turn or combine some of them into these and also Buster parts. You can also upgrade these as well for attack, energy, which determines how much ammo they have here, range, rapid, and special, which is whatever feature that one's good at, like active Buster gets homing. Not all weapons can be upgraded in each category. For instance, the mines that you lay out in front of you can't get better range. Most of these are some sort of gun, but you can also get stuff like a sword, a drill that you use to open up more paths, a shield, and a vacuum that collects enemy drops, which is good for grinding. You can also only equip one special weapon at a time, which you need to do at the R&D lab/car, where you typically find Roll and also Data, who can refill your energy, save your game, and give tips for what to do next. You also can't use special weapons in the city, in which case you'll have a kick instead. You can also summon the car in areas with parking spots and use it to quick travel. There are other upgrades you can find that you can equip, to do stuff like jump higher, skate around, and protect your head. Oh, and as a basic ability, you can also grab ledges, which should give you an idea of what kind of exploration you'll be doing. Then there are some other permanent upgrades you can buy, like body armor, max health, and an energy canteen, which is pretty much an E-tank that you can increase the size of, and you need to pay to refill. And don't worry, you only use what you need out of it. Is this everything? Well, I think it's at least all the major mechanics. You spend the majority of the game on Kattelox Island, only really the intro dungeon taking place elsewhere. There's one major population center, a walled-in city, with 5 different sections to it: Uptown, Downtown, Old City, City Hall, and the shopping arcade. That last one has the junk shop, which is where you get a lot of your upgrades from, and the rest all have various facilities you'd expect in a city, like a hospital and library. It's not too big, so it's not too hard to traverse, and it's pleasant to stroll through, assuming it isn't destroyed. Just watch out for cars. Also, don't be shy about checking trash cans and boxes, since sometimes they contain treasure. Outside of that, there's fields and the like. While occasionally there will be the bonds making a blockade you have to fight through, for the most part, they're just kind of open with a few NPCs to talk to. Their only real point to be pathways to the game's various dungeons. It's a nice and simple layout, and if it sounds like there isn't much going on, there's also various missions you can pick up. Some denizens of the island have things they need help with, stuff like donating artifacts to the museum, being a contestant in game shows, and disarming bombs for the police. Seriously? Anyway, these give you something to do, other than just hop from dungeon to dungeon, and net you some nice rewards, like items you can turn into weapons. More importantly, it makes the island feel a bit more lived in and makes you a little more invested in it and its citizens' well-being. There's actually a reputation system in place too. Do good deeds and people seem to like you. Be a jerk by doing stuff like kicking soda machines, and not only will your armor start getting darker, but NPCs will start bad-mouthing you. Needed to look that up because my Volnut is always a good boy. There's a few different types of dungeons: the optional dig sites, the sub-gates, the main gate, and the sub-cities. The sub-cities are just small little areas where you have to go in and take out all the enemies to get a key for endgame, but the rest are a little more interesting. The regular sites are just a bunch of brown hallways and rooms, and even the sub-gates are mostly the same, just with perhaps some different coloration and maybe some water. Each tends to be pretty small too, and not too hard to map out. Just walk around and yours will get filled in. There's no full maps that you can just pick up. Not the most detailed map either, just a few special objects like exits will appear, but things like treasure chests do not. Oh, and you also have to keep your eyes out for holes in the wall too, since those are essentially chests with money and items in them, but less obvious. The sub-gates might have a few oddball things to contend with, like having to collect keys or get a rusted chest thrown into a grinder. Despite what I said, I'm probably making them sound pretty boring, but here's what gets me about the whole thing. All the dungeons are connected. Sure, at first you're not going to be able to get far past most of the entrances, but as you get stuff like the higher jump or the drill, you start being able to get further in, and connecting the different sections, in the process finding more and more treasure. There's also some danger in this, since it's easier to get lost when suddenly there aren't really many terminating paths, and you're only able to view the section of the map you're in, but it's still a lot of fun to see how far you can get, what you can find, and how everything connects. In a sense, you could say this is a dungeon crawler with only one dungeon, but with how it's handled, it's really appealing for those who want to explore. As for the final section, the main gate, I do like how it's set up. At first you spiral downwards, fighting past enemies, followed by a room you need to get the sub-city keys for, before having to navigate a short maze. And yeah, just like everything else, it all ties back together. I just think that it does a good job building up to the finale, so it's worth a special mention. The two main types of enemies are Reaverbots and the Bonds. Reaverbots are found in ruins and tend to be sneakier, hiding around corners to jump out at you, or trying to get close so that they can just explode on you, though there are also some that attack in a more straightforward manner. They also look creepy as heck. The Bonds on the other hand are more power first, having obvious tanks and turrets and the like, and just trying to keep you from reaching the dungeon so that they can claim it instead. Kind of an interesting contrast between the two, both requiring caution but for the opposite reasons. Still, while it won't give you a direction, there is a warning light below your health meter that will light up when an enemy's close if you want to keep an eye on it. Taking out enemies can make them drop money and or health. The drops aren't set, so don't go expecting a specific amount taking out a particular enemy, but different ones are more likely to drop certain things. Oh, in addition to contact damage, if you blow up an enemy too close to yourself, you'll end up getting hit as well. So don't be too quick to claim your spoils, even if they do tend to disappear pretty quickly. The bosses fall into the same categories, but skewed more in favor of the bonds. The Reaverbot intro boss teaches you to keep your distance while finding attack windows, and this is going to be the case for most bosses. But with Tron's Ferdinand, which comes next, the attacks are not only more varied and complex, but you also have to worry about the buildings around you, otherwise you'll pay for it later. You have the same concern when facing the rest of the Bond's forces right after, but when the actual boss Bonbon shows up, it's not really a problem anymore. Just run away from his attacks, turn around to unload on him, then do it again when he preps his next move. With Tiesel's Marlwolf, it's recommended to take out its treads first, and there's a lot of jumping around to get a better vantage point, and even board the machine itself. For the Barkon, you're stuck on top of a boat, so it's pretty much on rails. You need to defend said boat and take what opportunities you can to strike back. When you finally fight a Reaverbot again, you just need to avoid its jump while jumping yourself so that your shots are high enough to take out its head. The Hounds after that, you need to contend with 3 enemies at once, which can be overwhelming, but I tend to just hide in the elevator and try to outdamage them. The most memorable fight though is probably the Gesellschaft, the Bond's massive airship that roll maneuvers the flutter around so that you can attack it while defending your own ship. The bird mech that they use afterwards though, the Flaukeroof, am I saying that right? Is kind of challenging. With its flying around, it can be hard to keep it in sight and in range, all while you're also playing defense. Bruno is another dodge around and take shots where you can, but hey, it's not too hard to get behind it in between big attacks and shoot it in the butt. The final boss, Mega Man Juno though, is another pain in the neck. He's got a lot of different attacks, most of which the move is to roll out of the way. Though that does really cut down on your windows of attack, and it can be hard to give yourself enough time to transition between attacking and dodging as well. Not only that, but the roll doesn't always work when he flings himself at you, pounding the ground and causing explosions in a fairly wide area. Maybe there's a better way to dodge it, but I always felt like RNG screwed me when he started spamming this. His second form though, I think is actually a lot easier. Sure, he's got larger and faster attacks, but he's so big that you can just kind of keep outrunning his strikes while still keeping a bead of fire on him. His weakness is strafing, which does not work on most. So yeah, it's an enjoyable set of bosses. While most are just, like I said, dodging and finding your window to counter, the Reaverbots are intimidating and the Bond mechs are fun, reminiscent of the sort of machines most anime villain trios tend to make. They certainly do make the whole adventure feel like a Saturday morning cartoon and overall, test your preparedness and just basic skills with the game's mechanics. The visuals are early 3D, which, in my opinion, tend to age really poorly. There are a lot of polygons and flat surfaces with elements just kinda stickered on. That said, since the characters are more cartoony, they make it through better than most, especially considering that some are at least partially mechanical. Sure, they may have big blocky fists, but when you're a robot man, that kinda works. And hey, big anime eyes don't seem as out of place as realistic ones, at least if we were to compare them to modern graphics. All this goes doubly so with the Reaverbots who, as straight up automatons, work really well with the blockiness. Great job working within limitations there. When it comes to environments though, time hasn't been quite as kind. A lot of the surfaces look really dull and, in worst case, I sometimes can't even tell what I'm looking at. This was definitely due to the hardware and what you would expect from the time, but hey, I still want to bring it up to praise what works and point out what doesn't. I like this more than a lot of early 3D, though I know some people who have only ever known the PS4 and beyond are gonna look at this and say, "You lived like this?" Yes, in 1997, we did. For a few special notes, refractors look more translucent, is that the word I want, on the PlayStation, and the Surbots have black mouths, as opposed to the N64's red, making them look somehow creepier in the original version. And because I don't know where else to mention this, there can also be an excess of text boxes at points, like when you reach into a hole. It takes 4 just to tell you that you found 20 bucks. Maybe that's the build-up expectation, but with as many of these as I clicked on, it became annoying real fast. The music is good, at least when it's there. There's a lot of parts where there's just no sound, other than the ones that you and your surroundings make. And to a degree, I get it. Running around in the ruins with only your footsteps and those of the enemies lurking somewhere nearby is kind of unnerving and highlights just how cut off you are from regular people. Hearing only the birds chirping as you explore shows just how tranquil the island is when it's not under attack. At the same time though, this is Rockman. Music is a big focus here, but for the parts we actually do get, like I said, I like it. We Are the Bond Siblings 3 always sticks with me, the Flutter vs. the Getzelschaft is really well known due to Tron's inclusion in the vs. Capcom games, and the main gate theme really gets me pumped. Those are my 3 favorites, and the rest of the music is pleasant as well. Apple Market puts me in a really good mood. There's also one minigame that plays classical music oddly enough, and the final boss fights you to organ music, to lay on the creep factor. While I prefer the more rock and fare of the platformers, I'd still say that this is a good OST, especially if you played the game back in the day and have nostalgia for it. Some might be put off by the periods of silence, but I don't think many will have complaints with the rest of it. But hey, that's not all when it comes to sound. The sound effects are pretty effective. From the buster plinks, your jumps, and when you get hit by a vehicle, it has real impact. Though Mega Man's squeaky footsteps might wear on some. There's also voice acting, which is actually pretty darn good. While I don't think they'd work in a serious drama, with the goofier tone here, they fit in pretty well, and I get the impression that a lot of the VAs enjoyed themselves with the way they portray the characters. Just listen to a line from the Serbots and try to tell me that someone's not having a good time. It's actually kinda crazy to consider that this came out from Capcom, for Mega Man, in the same period, PS1, as 8 and X4. The quality is so much higher, and if we ever got another game, I'd be happy if they got as much of the cast back together as they could. This also ties into another platform difference. The voice lines come out a lot clearer on PS1, things sounding compressed on the N64. For difficulty, the biggest stumbling block is the controls. Mega Man is really awkward to steer, your shoulder buttons adjusting which way you're facing, and them giving you a lock on, but you not being able to run around while it's on. There are a few ways around it. If your opponent is big enough, you can still strafe without the lock on in some encounters, but it can still feel a little weird. Once you're good with the controls, or at least passable though, most things are pretty reasonable. Most of the main dungeons are digestible, so even if you start hurting, it's typically not too much of a walk to get out and heal, though with how interconnected they are, it's a bit easier to get lost and get in over your head when you start really exploring, once you have the proper upgrades. Just be prepared and don't get cocky. And even with that general assessment, there are still some pretty big hurdles. The first Tron fight, when she's in the Ferdinand, is kind of a newbie crusher. In the grand scheme of things, it's not too hard, but it's the first major boss, so there's a fair chance that you won't have the controls down and you're expected to balance attacking with dodging, which doesn't exactly come naturally. Upgrades can also play a huge part in how effective you are in battle. Armor, health, stronger weapons, all that jazz can really help. But early on, maybe you don't know what you should be spending your money on, or you just forget, so you go up against Tron not only inexperienced, but also underpowered. While it only took me 2 tries on stream, I remember being stuck on her for quite a while as a kid. Tiesel's first mech, the Marl Wolf, was also really hard on me. It just requires a lot of jumping around, which isn't easy, especially, once again, early on. This was one of the few bosses that gave me trouble when I got back into it, but I'd say that if you can tough it out against these two, you can probably make it through the whole game. While I still had trouble against Juno, and I do think he's a decently challenging final boss, part of the issue was that I was rushing through the game and hadn't built myself up enough. When I went to my previous file, which had an extra 2 hours on me, I wiped the floor with the guy, which, again, brings up the point of how important upgrading is. If you take the time to engage with the game, do the extra stuff to get better equipment and maybe grind a bit, as long as you can make it through early game, where your options are limited, you'll be fine. If you're impatient and want to speedrun the game though, you might find this harder than the average player. So which is superior, Legends or 64? Well, a few things like refractors look sharper on Sony, but I like how the Serbots look on Nintendo more. Also on the visual side is a weird sort of pop-in on the N64, where bigger areas are just kind of fogged out in the distance, but you can see a lot further on PlayStation. PS1 definitely sounds better, and despite needing to play a 3D game with a D-pad, the joysticks do nothing. I'd also say that things control a lot better on that as well. The big advantage on N64 is loading, the game seeming to freeze when trying to save or bring up a cutscene on the PlayStation. In fact, I couldn't even beat the game on that system because the game kept failing to load in the scene where you unlock the main gate. I tried several times and let things sit for a while. I was getting really into that playthrough too. Maybe I had a bad disc or my PlayStation 2 was getting old, but because of that, I'll probably only be using my copy of Mega Man 64 going forward. It just feels more reliable. I think the game is still up on the PlayStation 3 store though, so that might actually be the best way to play it. Well, outside of other methods. I see nothing. A collection of the series might even be better still. As for how it stacks up on the whole, that's a bit of a trickier question. Despite some rough patches and me not having the controls completely down, I still had a lot of fun. The story and characters are my favorite part, no question, but just exploring and building up Volnut was also really appealing. That said, I kind of grew up with the N64. I could see modern audiences not being as forgiving when it comes to the controls and some of the other hardware limitations. Early 3D had a lot of growing pains, and I could see a lot of newer players not willing to put up with them, just to see how the whole rock, roll, Tron triangle develops. But hey, maybe I'm not giving people enough credit. Personally though, upon revisiting the game, I found it a lot more enjoyable and engaging than I thought I would, so I would recommend giving it a try if you can, or at least a watch. There's a reason Tron and the Surbots are as popular as they are. So now it's my turn to ask you, did you play this one? What did you think, and what version did you use? Would you pick up a re-release? We gotta be due a Legends and a Star Force collection soon, the question is which will come first. That'll do it for this week, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially Mega Man. Get me off the moon!